Welcome back to the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network. I'm Francis Rose. So far, we've covered the White House plan for IT modernization, centers of excellence, cloud computing, and how agencies can plan for modernization. But it's not a one-size-fits-all issue. Bringing a federal agency's technology infrastructure to near parity with the private sector can be drastically different depending on the size of the agency itself. Here to discuss, Chris Borneman, Chief Technology Officer at Software AG Government Solutions, Todd Simpson, the Chief Information Officer at the Food and Drug Administration, and Kirat Amin, who just retired as Chief Information Officer at the International Trade Commission. Thanks all for joining me today. Kirat, I want to start with you because this idea, there's I guess a predisposition to think IT modernization is IT modernization. You've lived the fact that at a large agency like the State Department, where you were for a time, the strategy could be and probably should be completely different than it would be at a smaller agency. Am I on the right track? Absolutely, you are. If you look at the CFO Act agencies versus small and independent agencies, it's totally different. It was a surprise to me, having worked this long in the federal IT, when I came to a small agency, the plight of the small agencies. The small agencies felt that the OMB mandates or FATARA or other things are not meant for them because they are under the radar, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And the revelation was, for example, when I came to the agency first, PIV 12, HSPD 12, we don't have to do it. TIC, MTIPS, we don't have to do it. Oh, no. No, I'm just an example, right? Mm-hmm. So that challenge starts right there. The second challenge starts with is you're playing with a small budget. However, your basic mandates and requirements of your infrastructure do not change. Mm-hmm. The only difference is the scale when you are larger, but the basic remains the same. And that's, Todd, exactly the challenge that you're up against, because you're going both ways. You're a piece of a larger agency, but you're running an enterprise that's pretty significant in its own right, and you're responsible for that, making sure that as you're moving up, you're interacting appropriately and correctly with what your colleagues at the other bureaus and departments are doing, right?
Absolutely, yes. And I think that, you know, the point about scale is very important. I think that the basic frameworks and approaches apply universally, but I think the larger the organizations get, the more federated they become, the more possibility there is for political and just the natural business model kind of overtaking in many different directions, whereas at a smaller agency, the missions tend to be a little bit more pointed. Mm-hmm. And at a larger agency, you're trying to do a lot, almost boil the ocean, if you will.
What does that mean? I imagine there are positives and negatives in that. What does that mean for somebody in your shoes who is thinking in a more specialized manner when you're thinking about formulating a specific strategy to implement IT or deliver a specific mission in a different way than the agency's done it before and so on?
So I think it really comes down to identifying the lines of service that are important to enable the business, and to listen to your customers and to kind of hone in on those economies of scale. Because in a federated environment, you're always going to have that other piece of IT that's going to be operating at the mission level. Mm-hmm. At each one of those special centers or whatever the organization may be called inside the federation. So I think finding your place in the universe is important, and working across the organization to identify a roadmap forward, a pathway, and then making sure that you put the governance mechanisms in place to properly guard the strategy that you put in place.
Chris, when you go in and talk to folks, I imagine the element of surprise sometimes is maybe the same as Kirat's, where people think, well, we're small, this doesn't apply to us. And as he said, the opposite is entirely true. What are then some of the, what's the dialogue like that realization generates for folks when they understand, you know, as a small organization, we might, on top of all of these other challenges, be behind the 8 ball?
Absolutely. And so what we found when we start those conversations is just opening up what are others doing, mm-hmm. and what are some of the best practices you can leverage. You know, one of the advantages as you start dialoguing is you start sharing information, right? And once you start doing that, then you can find ways to maybe circumvent a lot of the investment that others have already made that the smaller agencies can leverage. And this thing I've always personally found is that no matter what my budget was, if I look for opportunities, if I understand what my spend is, what my portfolio is, how it supports my mission, is that I can free up funds. And tying that back to the Modernizing Government Technology Act, is now I can kind of bank that and start accumulating funds that I can then use for my modernization efforts. So I can start doing the things that maybe as a small agency originally I couldn't do, that now I can start saving up and taking advantage of.
Kirit, we just have a minute left, but I want to give you the final thought here, because it strikes me that, let's think back to when you walked into ITC and you thought about the possibilities that you knew existed in other agencies to leverage work that they'd already done, whether it was using contracts, whatever. What was the reception like? Is that something that you think small agencies are thinking about now, as these opportunities already exist and we can leverage stuff that's already out there?
Absolutely. I went on a crusade, if you will, about a year and a half ago, and I went to the Executive Leadership Conference in Williamsburg in 2016 and spoke about the plight, if you will, of the small agencies. From there, ACT-IAC picked it up, and they sponsored under community of interest, and I sponsored the project where they assigned several people from the industry and government to go interview and talk about the small and independent agencies. And we had a roundtable at GSA about 2 months ago. Based on that, they came up with 5 recommendations, and also how the small agencies collectively scale. They don't independently. So how do we go about create through GSA, DHS, and OMB? And a good example was CDM, which was basically small and independent agency, was providing a shared service provided by DHS, funded through OMB, and GSA became the contracting arm. Perfect model that needs to be now more utilized so that the industry will say, yes, we can play in this as well.
As agencies modernize, they'll need a good grasp on what they already have and how to integrate it more effectively with a wave of new tech coming in. That's easier said than done. We step back for a look at the big picture next. You're watching the Tech Leadership Series, IT Modernization, on the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network.
Connecting people, systems, and data. Sounds easy, but can be a challenge for government agencies, especially those with aging IT infrastructure. Software AG's digital business and web methods platform connects applications, data, and devices quickly and seamlessly, giving agencies agility and flexibility at the speed their users expect. Learn why so many federal agencies and corporations rely on Software AG to accomplish their most critical missions. Visit softwareaggov.com.
Your most critical application? The answer to that question is key to modernizing your agency's federal IT infrastructure. But finding the answer to that question can be a real challenge, because many agencies don't have a full inventory of their entire IT portfolio. That's where we'll wrap this special program. Joining me once again, Chris Borneman, Chief Technology Officer at Software AG Government Solutions, Todd Simpson, the CIO at the Food and Drug Administration, and Kirit Amin, who just retired as the Chief Information Officer at the International Trade Commission. Thanks again for continuing the conversation. Chris, I want to start with you, because that idea of knowing exactly what you have sounds easy initially. It's not easy. When I hear from the agencies that I've talked to where they've actually done it, it's not a simple process at all, is it?
No, it's not. And so when we engage with different customers, what we found is that they have a general feeling of what they think is important, but they don't necessarily understand that, and they can't articulate it. So we'll start a process with them so we can actually inventory kind of the breadth, what area of focus they've got, and then drill into that so you understand the interdependencies, what technology is it sitting on top of, what deficiencies do you have, what processes does your technology support? So put it into a business context versus an IT context, and how does that align to your mission or to your strategy? And then how do you compare that back into like cybersecurity risk? So that if you combine all that together, then you can figure out what are your targets for modernization, what are your targets to go to the cloud, and then what's your prioritization, right? So what maybe your biggest pain point may not be your first project you really should take off. You should start on maybe something a little bit smaller that you know you can manage your risks to.
I imagine, Todd, that's exactly the kind of information that you're relying on to build a modernization strategy. Am I on the right track?
Absolutely. You can't manage what you don't know you have. And I know that at the FDA, we worked very, very hard to identify a portfolio of projects, a portfolio of applications, and to basically go through the entire gamut to figure out what we have. And I can confidently say that we have 323 FSMA apps, and 7.2% of our application footprint is in the cloud. So that's 2.5 years fast forward. And that's quite a challenge, especially when you have, again, a federated environment where you have lots of competing needs, and you have applications that are owned by centers and owned by a larger group. And then you have the Cloud First initiative that are driving business decisions that may or may not preclude other business decisions. For example, maybe email is the most important application at the FDA. Maybe it isn't. I'd have to talk to my customers about that, but email went to the cloud before many of the other applications that I believe have huge interoperability issues and are even duplicated across the fence.
So, Kirit, there's a challenge here because shadow IT is part of the problem with the inventory and knowing what you have or not knowing what you have, but it's not the only element there, right?
No, it's not. And I think getting the initiatives, and you have twofold initiatives, right? One is your portfolio of what your IT initiatives are. The other aspect is what are the portfolios of the business side. So you got to balance the two. You got to have your infrastructure and everything modernized as well as secure while you are going to your business side and making sure that the business comes first and not technology. We can't put technology in front of business. So the biggest thing is business, understand them and partner with the business units to make sure that you understand their needs and what the mission delivery is all about.
When that gets woven together, that's really kind of the sweet spot of what you're aiming for,
absolutely,
right?
and if you don't do that, because everything is IT reliant, right? I mean, no business today is conducted without that. So how do you blend, educate your business people why the infrastructure side is as important, if not more, than your mission side, because it's like highways. This is infrastructure. You have the Ferraris if you want on the highways, but if they are not properly built and not properly managed, you're not going anywhere. So that blending is very important.
And Bill Zielinski from GSA talked about that earlier, and that's this whole idea, Chris, of IT as infrastructure. We joked even a little bit in between segments about putting on a hard hat and thinking about it the same way that we think about roads and bridges and so on as infrastructure. Is this maybe the next breakthrough in the way that agencies think about how they're building their businesses?
I think infrastructure is a great analogy in terms of your foundation sides. And then what you think about your IT, if you're looking at that same analogy, you start thinking about your business centers. What do you connect together, right? So ultimately you have to function. If you think about a city and city planning, it's not just about the roads, but ultimately it's how you get people to be able to perform work. And so you have to have that overall arching view that infrastructure is great, but also how you tie it back to the business side. And one of the things that I've been impressed with is that over the last few years, we've shifted our vernacular around from talking about government technology to really put into business systems, business technology, and looking to industry for more solutions. And I think it's a good move that we look at the infrastructure side as infrastructure and then extend it on out.
Chris, Todd, Kirit, thanks all very much. I appreciate your time.